My name is Jessica Huang. I am 30 years old. And the Tuesday my aunt sent a message to the family chat was the Tuesday I finally understood that invisible work does not become visible on its own. You have to stop doing it. The notification came at 2:34 in the afternoon. I was at my desk at work between calls when my phone lit up with activity from the family group. The chat had been quiet for most of October, dormant since a thread about a cousin's job change the previous week. I picked up the phone, expecting nothing in particular. The message was from my Aunt Linda. It read, "Family Thanksgiving is finalized. Confirmed for the 28th at Mom's. Don't invite Jessica. She brings nothing to this family. We're keeping it to people who actually show up." There were 11 people in the group. I was one of them. 3 family members had already replied by the time I opened it. A thumbs up from my cousin Derek. A heart from my Aunt Linda's daughter Priya. A message from my mother's younger brother, my Uncle Raymond, that said simply, "Sounds good." I read the thread once. I put my phone face down on my desk. I sat with my hands flat on either side of my keyboard for a moment, looking at the monitor in front of me without reading it. Then I picked the phone back up, opened my banking app, and navigated to my recurring transfers. There were 4 active transfers in the list. The first was my rent. The second was a savings contribution. The third and fourth were labeled grandma, rent and grandma, expenses. Together they totaled $1,340 per month. They had been running for 37 months. I looked at both transfers for a moment. Then I opened my calendar, noted the date, and did nothing else that evening. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever thought to investigate, was that my grandmother's apartment, the one where Thanksgiving was being finalized for the 28th, the one where my Aunt Linda had hosted every holiday gathering for the past 4 years, as though the warmth and stability of it were her own creation, had been financially viable for over 3 years primarily because of 2 automatic transfers that left my account on the 3rd of every month without acknowledgement, without thanks, and apparently without anyone noticing they existed. I had 12 days until the 3rd. I need to explain the shape of my family before I explain what I did with those 12 days, because the shape is the thing that made the message possible. My grandmother, Lily Chen, is 74 years old. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in a building managed by Eastfield Residential Partners, a mid-sized property management company that handles several hundred units in the city's eastern neighborhoods. She has lived there for 11 years since my grandfather passed, and the house they had shared for 30 years became more than she could maintain alone. The apartment costs $1,140 per month in base rent. Her monthly prescriptions, which cover a blood pressure medication and a thyroid supplement she has taken for 9 years, run approximately $200 through her insurance plan. Her cable and internet package, which she uses primarily for the news channel she watches from 7 in the morning until she falls asleep on the couch, costs an additional flat rate that I cover as part of the expenses transfer. My grandmother's income is a fixed Social Security payment and a small pension from the textile company where she worked for 22 years before her retirement. Combined, these sources cover her food, her personal expenses, and most of her utilities. They do not cover her rent. They have not covered her rent since a rent increase 3 years ago raised the base rate beyond what her income could absorb. When this happened, my grandmother called my Aunt Linda. Linda is the oldest of my grandmother's 3 children, lives 20 minutes from the apartment, and had organized herself, over the years, into the family's default point of contact for anything involving my grandmother's life: doctor's appointments, holiday logistics, the management of decisions that required someone to make a phone call and follow through. She was good at the organizational layer. She was less good at the financial one, which she had never needed to be because she had a husband with a stable salary and a family income that did not require her to stretch. Linda's response to my grandmother's rent problem, I learned secondhand through my mother, was that the family would figure it out together. What this meant in practice was that Linda organized a family call. The call produced a general acknowledgement that something needed to be done, and then the call ended without a specific commitment from anyone. I was not on that call. I had not been invited. I found out about the situation 2 weeks later when my grandmother mentioned it to me directly, not as a request, but in the way she sometimes shared information as a fact about the world that she had accepted and was now living inside. She said the rent had gone up and she was working out how to manage it. She said Linda was looking into options. I asked her what the new amount was.
She told me.
I did the arithmetic in my head against what I knew of her income. The gap was $1,140 per month, the full rent amount as it turned out, because what my grandmother had not said, and I only understood later, was that her income covered her other expenses, but had never actually covered the rent even before the increase. The increase had simply made the gap impossible to paper over with small adjustments. I told her I would take care of the rent. She looked at me across her kitchen table and started to say something about not wanting to be a burden. I told her she was not a burden. I set up the transfer the following week. I added the prescription and cable expenses the month after that when I reviewed her bills and saw the amounts. I told my mother what I had done. My mother said that was very good of me. She did not tell Linda. I did not tell Linda. Nobody told Linda because Linda had already moved past the problem. It had been resolved, as problems in our family tended to be resolved, without her needing to understand by whom. That was 37 months ago. In the time since, I had attended every family gathering I was invited to, which was not all of them, a fact I had noticed and filed without acting on. I had sent birthday gifts to my cousins. I had helped my grandmother with 2 medical appointments when her regular transportation fell through, which happened 4 times in 3 years. I had sat at the Thanksgiving table in my grandmother's apartment twice, once 2 years ago and once the year before, and listened to my Aunt Linda describe the warmth of family and the importance of showing up for each other, while I ate food that had been prepared in a kitchen that existed in its current form because of a transfer that left my account on the 3rd of every month. I am a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm. My supervisor is a man named Glenn Waterford, who has managed our department for 7 years and is precise about timelines and indifferent to sentiment, which I have always found clarifying. I coordinate freight scheduling across 3 regional distribution hubs, which means I spend most of my working days tracking dependencies, the things that must happen before other things can happen, the places where a single point of failure will cascade into a chain of delays. I am, professionally, someone who understands systems. I understand how load is distributed, where the load-bearing points are, and what happens when one of them is removed. My family, I had come to understand, had a similar structure. The load-bearing points were rarely the people who received the credit for the building standing. I kept a personal record of the transfers, not in a spreadsheet, but in a notes file on my phone where I logged each payment as it cleared. I had started doing this not as strategy but as habit. I track things. It is how I think. The file had 37 entries by October, each one dated, each one showing the 2 transfer amounts and the running total. The running total, as of the most recent entry, was $49,580. That number had never been spoken aloud in any room my Aunt Linda occupied. On the Wednesday after the family chat message, I called my grandmother. We spoke for 35 minutes. We talked about her health, about a television program she had been following, about the weather. Near the end of the call, she asked if everything was all right. She had a way of sensing when something was being carried without being said. I told her I was fine. Asked her if she had heard from Linda recently. She said yes, Linda had called about the Thanksgiving arrangements. I asked if she was looking forward to it. She said she was. I did not tell her about the message. I did not tell her what I was considering. I said I would call her the following week, and I meant it. On Thursday, I reviewed the transfer schedule. On the 3rd of November, 12 days from the Tuesday the message had arrived, the 2 recurring transfers would process automatically unless I changed them. The base rent transfer would reach my grandmother's account, she would pay her landlord, and the arrangement would continue exactly as it had for 37 months, invisible and uncredited, and apparently consistent with my bringing nothing to the family. I looked at the transfers in my banking app for a long time. Then I navigated to the recurring transfer settings and paused both items, effective the upcoming cycle. A confirmation appeared. Recurring transfers paused. Next scheduled transfer will not process. I closed the app. I made dinner. I ate it at my kitchen table, which is in my apartment, in a city, in the life I had built quietly and without anyone paying particular attention, and I thought about what I was doing and why, and what I wanted to come out of it. I was not trying to punish my grandmother.
I want to be clear about that.
My grandmother had not sent the message. My grandmother did not know what her rent situation was or where her rent came from because nobody had ever sat down with her and explained the complete picture. What I was doing was removing a structural support from a system that had been organized to make that support invisible and waiting to see what happened when the people who had made it invisible were confronted with its absence. I called my grandmother's landlord on Friday morning. The property manager at Eastfield Residential Partners was a woman named Caroling, whom I had spoken with once before, a year earlier, when a billing discrepancy in my grandmother's account had required a correction. She was efficient and kept thorough records. I identified myself as the person who had been making the rent payments on behalf of Lily Chun in Unit 4C, and I told her I was calling to notify her that the upcoming month's payment would not be processing automatically, and that she should follow up directly with the tenant regarding the payment arrangement going forward. Caroling asked me to confirm the unit and the tenant name. She confirmed the payment history on file. She said she would note the change and follow up with the tenant directly. I thanked her. I ended the call at 8:47 a.m. The 1st of November passed. The 3rd arrived. The transfers did not process. On the 7th, Caroling sent a written notice to my grandmother's apartment regarding the outstanding rent balance. My grandmother called my Aunt Linda the same day. I know this because my mother called me that evening, her voice carrying the particular register of someone who had recently received information they did not know how to hold. She said, "Linda got a call from Mom about the rent." I said, "I know." A pause. "What do you mean you know?" I said, "I've been paying Mom's rent for 3 years, Mom. I stopped this month." The silence on the line lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Then my mother said, "You've been paying it." I said, "Since the rent increase." 37 months. The full amount, plus her prescriptions and cable. My mother said, "Linda thought the family had worked it out." I said, "The family had a call. Then I paid it. Nobody asked how." Another silence. Then, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I said, "I told you when I started. You didn't tell Linda." She was quiet. I said, "Mom, I got a message on Tuesday from Linda telling the whole family not to invite me to Thanksgiving because I bring nothing to this family. I'd like you to think about what those two things mean side by side." I heard her exhale, the specific exhale of someone doing an arithmetic they do not want to do. "Then I'll call Linda." I said, "Okay." She said, "What are you going to do about the rent?" I said, "I don't know yet. I'll let you know." Linda called me on the 8th. I was in a team meeting with Glenn Waterford and 2 of my freight coordinators, a woman named Stephanie Cho and a man named Marcus Reyes, reviewing a scheduling conflict in the Northern Hub that had created a 3-day delay in a client's distribution chain. I felt the phone vibrate in my pocket twice and let it go. She called again at noon while I was eating lunch at my desk. I answered. She said, "Jesse." I said, "Hi, Linda." She said, "Your mother told me what you've been doing for Mom." I didn't know. I said, "I know you didn't." She said, How did this happen? Who told you about the rent increase?" I said, "Grandma mentioned it." I did the math. I set up the transfers. She said, "And you've just been paying it for 3 years." I said, 37 months. She was quiet. Then, Caroling sent a notice to the apartment. "Mom's very worried." I said, "I know." I called Caroling before I paused the transfers. A pause. "You planned this." I said, "I paused the transfers after your message on Tuesday. The one where you told everyone not to invite me to Thanksgiving because I bring nothing." The line was silent. I said, "I want to be clear about something, Linda. I didn't stop the payments to hurt Grandma. I stopped them because the message you sent made it clear to me that my contribution to this family is either invisible or irrelevant, and I'm not willing to continue making an invisible contribution to a family that has decided in writing that I have nothing to offer." She said, "That message wasn't about, I didn't know what you were doing." I said, "No, you didn't. That's the point." She said, "What do you need from me?" The question landed differently from the way that question had landed in other conversations I had been having that month. Not tentative, the way Temmie's version had sounded, but direct, almost transactional, because Linda is a direct and transactional person when she is operating in problem-solving mode. I had always known this about her. It was not a bad quality. It was simply what she reached for when the sentiment failed. I said, I need 3 things. First, I need Grandma's rent paid this month by the family, not by me. You have 11 days before the late notice becomes something Carol Ng has to escalate. Second, I need a family conversation, a real one, about what the arrangement going forward looks like, who contributes what and how, and whether that includes me. Third, I need the message you sent on Tuesday to be addressed. Not to me privately. To the group where you sent it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's fair. I said, I know. She said, the rent this month, I can cover it. I said, good. She said, and the family conversation. I'll set it up. I said, let me know when. She said, Jessie. I said, yeah. She said, I owe you an apology. A real one. I'm working up to it. I said, take your time. I'll be here. I ended the call. I looked at my lunch for a moment, then ate the rest of it. I had a scheduling review with Marcus at 2. I did not think about the call again until I was on the train home that evening. Linda sent a message to the family group on the 9th. It said, I owe Jessica an apology. I sent a message last week that was wrong, and I sent it to a group that included her, which made it worse. Jessica has been paying Mom's rent and expenses for 3 years without any of us knowing or acknowledging it. I should have known. I should have asked. I'm sorry, Jessica. She had tagged my name at the end. Derek replied with a message that said, wow. I didn't know. I'm sorry too, Jessie. Priya sent a private message to me that was 4 lines, careful, slightly formal, the way Priya writes when she is unsure of the footing but trying anyway. I replied with a brief acknowledgement and left room for more. My Uncle Raymond called and left a voicemail that lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds and covered, in order, his surprise, his regret at the thumbs up he had sent, and a rambling story about a time he had done something similar for his own mother-in-law that I think was meant to establish solidarity. I called him back later that week. The family conversation happened on a Sunday evening, a video call with 7 participants, organized and moderated by Linda in the way she organized everything, efficiently with an agenda, and with the specific combination of authority and accountability that made her good at the logistics of family, even when she was less good at the emotional architecture beneath them. We talked for 1 hour and 20 minutes. I said what I needed to say. Not everything, not the 37 months of accumulated weight, not the specific texture of sitting at a Thanksgiving table and listening to the wrong people be thanked. I said the things that were actionable, that I had been carrying something alone that should have been shared, that I was willing to continue contributing if the contribution was acknowledged and structured, and that I needed to not be invisible in my own family as a condition of participating in it. Linda said, we didn't see you clearly. That's on us. I said, yes. She said, we'd like to. I said, okay. Then let's start from there. The rent arrangement going forward is a shared one. Linda covers a portion. My Uncle Raymond's family covers a smaller portion. I cover the remainder, less than before, and within a structure that has been written down and agreed to, with Carol Ng's office updated to reflect the new payment contacts. I reinstated a revised transfer on the 1st of December. The amount was $480 per month, my share of the new arrangement. The previous amount was $1,340. The difference stays in my account. I was at Thanksgiving on the 28th. Linda had called me the week before to say I was expected. I brought a dish, a scallion pancake recipe my grandmother had taught me when I was 9, which takes 40 minutes to make properly, and which I have never once brought to a family gathering without my grandmother saying the same thing. You made these the right way. She said it again this year. She said it standing at the kitchen counter, watching me set the plate down, and her voice had the particular quality it sometimes has when she is saying something simple that means more than the words. I did not explain to her what had happened in October. She is 74, and she has enough to carry. What she knows is that the rent is sorted and her family is present, and for now that is enough for her. For me, it is a beginning of something different. Not a conclusion. The family is still the family, with all its patterns and histories and the particular ways each of us has learned to occupy our position in it. But something has been named that was not named before, and naming changes the shape of things even when it does not change the things themselves. Glenn Waterford told me once, reviewing a freight routing problem that had cascaded for 3 days before anyone traced it back to its source, that the most expensive errors in logistics are not the ones that fail loudly, but the ones that fail silently for a long time, in a place nobody thought to look. You find them by paying attention to what is not where it should be, the absence of something expected, the gap in the sequence where the load was supposed to land. I had been the gap nobody looked at. I decided to let the gap show. That is the only thing I did. I let the absence speak in the language that the absence needed to speak in. Everything else followed from that. Here is what I have come to understand in the months since October. Contribution that goes unnamed does not protect you. It does not build the relationship you are hoping it will build. It builds a structure that everyone benefits from and nobody examines, and the person holding it up becomes load without becoming presence. Those are different things. You are allowed to require both. Before you go, the moment Linda sent the apology to the family group on the 9th and tagged my name at the end, what would you have done next? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe. There are more here, and I want to keep telling them. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for being here.